Welcome to this evening's broadcast. This is the Biohacker PT. We're live streaming on multiple platforms tonight. Facebook Live, YouTube Live, Twitch, Periscope, and Chashu TV. Hopefully the sound is coming well tonight with good volume and wonderful sound. Now, tonight's broadcast is dealing with this topic that we had earlier this week on Monday, and that was with the role of nitric oxide in the treatment of pain. This is part 2. The first was on Monday, and today is Wednesday. Welcome Wednesday. Now, we're going to get straight into the main topic tonight. Let's see. Let's go to our slideshow. Why don't we? We're looking at what I call the pain connection. The pain connection. Now, this is my approach. We're dealing with biohacking, and in the physical therapy realm, we look not only at the bones and the joints and the ligaments and the tendons and the fascia and the blood flow. We look at the whole picture. And it's not only the structural aspect, but it's also the functional aspect. The things that deal with non-structural causes for symptoms and disease and pain. Dis-ease meaning dis-ease. Now, one of the things that we look at is biochemistry. And not only biochemistry, but neurophysiology. We can kind of say that in one word, maybe. Biochemical neurophysiology, if you might want to put it that way. Now, last week we looked at serotonin. Now, we might come back to that topic because there's much to learn. Now, this week we are involving nitric oxide. We had a very positive approach about nitric oxide last time. Now, we have to understand both with immunity and inflammation that there's always the downside. Pro-inflammation, anti-inflammation. These things are sometimes good as we boost immunity, and sometimes they are not so good as we lose immunity. Let's look at a corticosteroid, for instance. We end up increasing the effect by decreasing the immunity, at the same time decreasing the inflammation. There is a hyperimmune response that's causing the inflammation. So if we boost immunity, we end up increasing our inflammation. So what we need to do now is regulate, because there is a immunity dysregulation. And that's what we need to focus on as we look at this chapter of nitric oxide. Now, the first portion is going to deal more with the nuts and the bolts. We're looking at an article called Nitric Oxide, Chronic Inflammation and Autoimmunity in Immunology Letters. Now let's see if that is under our Josh Hu search. Now I really want to encourage all of those professionals listening to use Josh Hu search. Now last broadcast I looked at nitric oxide as a search, and we use DuckDuckGo, and I want to show you. And I wanted to have an image of what nitric oxide was, and this is what it gave me. Now, does that look like nitric oxide to you? I don't think so. Now, if we look at Josh Hu's search engine, it's search.joshhu.net, and we put in the same parameters, nitric oxide, and we look at the images, and what do we see? Do we see any commercial for supplements? We have a couple of these ones here that we see. This is the one that I showed last time, I believe. But in Josh Hu, this is what we have. A very excellent search engine that will help you get away from the commercialism and away from those algorithms that seem to censor the data that's out there. Now, it might not only be political, but it could also be scientific knowledge. And is that good? I believe it is censorship, and we have to move away from that. So let's look at this and see if we can find a good picture about nitric oxide. Now you can go to this same search and look at your own picture and references to that. Now this should open up into a bigger screen. There it is. This is an article dealing with nitric oxide, master molecule for health and longevity. It talks about nitric oxide as it is declining with age. Now, it is a gas. Some people even call it a laughing gas. Nitric oxide, in short, is made from the endothelium or arterial lining, which is estimated to be 60,000 miles in length, reaching every part of the molecular universe of your body. Now, we learned last time there are 3 forms of nitric oxide. The 3 forms of nitric oxide are the endothelial nitric oxide, the neuronal nitric oxide, and the inducible nitric oxide. Now, in an article that I'm going to show later, it's going to show that 2 of those are good and 1 is bad, if we can use those terms. Now, we know that we can't use those terms with just good or bad for immunity or good or bad for inflammation, because you need inflammation. You need to have immunity, or you need to have a reduction or regulation of immunity as well. You also need to have pain. There are some people who don't have pain, and then you put your hand on the stove, you're going to burn your hand. So we have to think about pain as something beneficial in some aspect. Now, chronic pain is different. And in fact, when we look at nitric oxide and chronic pain, and specifically neuropathic pain or central sensitization, we see that there is an increase in this nitric oxide in the body. So we do a saliva swab of the mouth, and we note with people who have multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis, or they might even have chronic fatigue syndrome, and these are looking at things that are where your immunity is in hyperdrive. Now, all of this discussion is also influenced by what I call the COVID-19 storm, all right? And what I mean by that is the data and the research and the statistics is spurred by this research for SARS-CoV-2. And what's good about this is that we know that cytokines in this storm is one of the aspects of this disease, the second phase that can affect you even if your immunity is high, because it actually uses your body to start to attack itself, almost a hyperimmunity, maybe even an autoimmunity if we think about it that way, and then your body starts to pretty much become necrotic from these destructive cell reactions. So we have to also think about this with nitric oxide. Now, endothelial nitric oxide, the one that dilates the blood vessels that are in the linings and the arterial linings, when they open up, they create better circulation. And if you can have better circulation, you're going to have better outcomes when it comes to trying to decrease some of your symptoms at times. And particularly in this situation, we're looking at pain. All right, so let's continue on with this. Welcome to one of the viewers, it looks like online. I'm not sure where you're at, but please join us on the chat if you'd like to. And there's also a way to join on the voice as well on my Discord server. All right, it's the Biohacker PT. Hashtag or number sign 7376, and you can join that way if you like to. There is no moderator, so please be family friendly. All right, so unlike other signaling molecules, nitric oxide is a gas that penetrates through tissues. It has the following effects on your cardiovascular system. So we talked about this last time, and sometimes that is good. Now, it looks like this picture here that we got, I guess, involved with when we clicked onto this, it just shows how things are with, it says here, age-related changes. It's also involved with the many essential functions of the body. All right. Now, I'm using this article right now because it is a little more succinct, and I'm looking pretty much at the image that was on Joshua's search. Now, one of the other ones that I think I found interesting here, if we look through this, is this one here. Let's see if we can go to this one. Again, it might be more of a layman's article for those who are out there in the private sector and looking at that. All right, so let's go to this web page and see what it looks like on its original page. Now, what brought me to using the Joshua search engine is that it's not showing all these supplements for nitric oxide. It's actually showing me information about nitric oxide. Again, why nitric oxide? Our aim is to utilize the unique antimicrobial and immunomodulating properties of nitric oxide to treat both dermatological and respiratory disease. All right, so it's involved with this immunomodulation. So we have to remember that it's this, I believe, the inductive nitric oxide that we see in the autoimmune diseases. So we think about, if we increase that either through diet or through exercise, is that going to be detrimental for those people who have a high amount of nitric oxide already? So we have to at least be careful with that as we think about that. Again, there's a separation between the good and the bad nitric oxide, as we see in one of these articles that we're going to have coming up. Now, it's important to look at it in the aspect of also this dermatological aspect as well. I'm very interested in that because of my own issues with dermatological conditions. Okay, so let's go to the article of actually the information here first on the immunological letters, and that's in 2007. So we're going to go through this fairly quickly as it talks about some conditions. Here it has lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. And note that's the symbols for nitric oxide, not dioxide or trioxide, but nitric oxide, singular oxygen, modulates myocardial events that are involved in apoptosis and regulates mitochondrial biogenesis in many cell types, including lymphocytes. Several studies undertaken on patients with rheumatoid arthritis and lupus have documented increased endogenous NO synthesis, although the effects of nitric oxide may be distinct. All right, so here it's saying there's an increase in the endogenous nitric oxide synthesis. All right. So remember, we have the epithelial, the neuronal, and the inductive. And here it's saying the endogenous. Okay, so here we discuss recent evidence that nitric oxide, let's see what happened here. Here we discuss recent evidence that nitric oxide contributes to T-cell dysfunction in both lupus and rheumatoid arthritis by altering multiple signaling pathways in T cells. Although nitric oxide may play a physiological role in lymphocyte signaling, its overproduction may perturb T-cell activation, differentiation, and effector responses, each of which may contribute in different ways to the pathogenesis of autoimmunity. So autoimmunity in this sense is, of course, the body attacking itself as its own invader. So let's look at this article here. I think I might not have that link on it for this one, but I think it will be somewhere here. Let me find it here. Here it is. I think this is it. Is that the one that we looked at? We looked at that one last time, I think. Chronic inflammation and autoimmunity. Okay, and that is chronic. All right, so let's see if it worked the second level for this. See it. I'll find it for you and I'll put it on the link below, okay? I think my research tag was maybe either nitric oxide with pain or with inflammation. All right, we'll move on. So the next article that we're going to look at, actually we're still on this one here, the role of inducible nitric oxide and nitric oxide. Oh no, this is synthesis. So again, this is actually, I think it's, yes. It's the enzyme and nitric oxide in the immune system comprise both regulatory and effector functions. This first category includes immunosuppressive effects, inhibition of lymphocyte proliferation, and the modulation of cytokine response. So we see there's two there. The first category is the immunosuppressive effects and the modulation of cytokine response. Okay, that's the first category. And I think that goes along with that picture that we saw a while ago right here. And the second aspect is immunopathological effects, the tissue destruction and immunoprotective activities, killing the microbial pathogens and apoptosis of autoreactive T cells. So this is the one that starts to damage your own body, or it can damage the things that it needs to damage, all right? So this immunopathological effect and immunoprotective activities. So let's look at this one here in the pathogens and disease article in that journal, the role of nitric oxide in inflammatory reactions. The role of nitric oxide might be different in early or late disease stages for a given cell. The response of nitric oxide would depend on its reactivity state, the microenvironment, and its tissue type. Nitric oxide is therefore likely to have a multifaceted role in inflammatory reactions, ranging from the enhancement of vasodilation and the formation of edema through modulation of sensory nerve endings and leukocyte activity to tissue cytotoxicity. And that is the end of that one. All right. So we're going to now go, I would say, just ad lib here. And there is, from the first level here, an article that comes up from an interesting site that I just discovered, Dr. K. All right, and I can't say his name, but he has a lot of letters behind his last name there. And this one here, I think, even though I have read many articles, this one here kind of summed it up quite well. Now, a lot of these things might be, I'm not saying that it's anecdotal, has lack of research, but he has, in addition to the research that's there and the references that we have on the bottom of this article, he also has some excellent information about the autoimmune function here, and then the T helper cell condition is 17 right here. Okay, TH17. That's going to be a very important helper T cell player. I like this article because it has a very good summation of how it's involved and how we need to be careful with this as we look into our use of nitric oxide, the role of nitric oxide in the treatment of pain. Now, we know that in the past they didn't have association with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome as autoimmune, but as we look a little bit more at time, we're seeing that there is some very significant similarities and overlap that we'll talk about maybe in another broadcast. But specifically in this situation, he's talking about Hashimoto's thyroid autoimmunity. All right. In the thyroid book, I introduced the concepts of Th1 and Th2. Remember T helper cell 1 and 2, and their role in autoimmune diseases such as Hashimoto's. It turns out another key player in the autoimmune scenario is Th17, and that we can work with nitric oxide and glutathione, the most powerful antioxidant in the body. And we can find that we can generate that through the process of NAC and also other digestive functions through our nutrition. Okay, so again, that's hard in its absorption and bioavailability, but we can talk about that in a future article review in glutathione. All right, so it's talking about how we can work with nitric oxide and glutathione to tame autoimmune destruction caused by Th17. So as we look at other articles on this search, we can even see how it's related to the cytokine storm, or how it's involved with COVID. There are many TH, again, TH means helper T cell players, actually, but Th17 is one worth tuning into or turning the spotlight on for a moment. When the immune system triggers an autoimmune response, the autoimmune reaction expresses predominantly through either Th1 or Th2 symptoms, as explained in chapter 3 of Why Do I Still Have Thyroid Symptoms? And he also has another book I haven't ordered yet, but I will order, dealing with brain fog. All right, I'm not going to tell you that I have brain fog, but when activated, the Th1 and Th2 systems release cytokines or immune messenger cells called IL-17. So Th17 and IL-17, and that would be the A or alpha version. These cytokines in turn promote tissue destruction at the site of autoimmune attacks, which for our purposes is the thyroid gland, okay? In this situation. Now we know with rheumatoid arthritis and lupus and other conditions, we can also, in the multiple sclerosis even, we know that there are other tissues that are being attacked in this situation. TH cells, Th17 cells, are a fairly recent discovery and believed to be connected with autoimmune destruction when found in abundance. Th17 is the system that adds fuel to the autoimmune fire and determines the severity of tissue destruction. It's important to understand that Th17 isn't all bad. It also plays an antimicrobial role in the body's mucosal lining, preventing infection from microbes such as Candida or Staphylococcus. But when it comes to the immune system, too much of a good thing ends up creating an imbalance with bad results. So there's a reference number 1 on this at the bottom. using nitric oxide to modulate autoimmunity activity. IL-17 does the dirty work of destroying tissue by activating a compound called inducible nitric oxide. Now, we talked about that earlier. Nitric oxide is a gas. Nitric oxide is a gas in the body that acts as a signaling compound, triggering things to happen. It plays a role in many normal physiological processes, but also in the disease. In disease. There are 3 forms of nitric oxide. We talked about that. And here, Dr. K says 2 are beneficial and 1 is destructive. Exercise enthusiasts. Now, I wanted to go ahead and emphasize this in this section because for those who are, I would want to say, the old term gung-ho about exercise, this is to take heart. Exercise enthusiasts take an amino acid supplement called arginine to boost nitric oxide, and that's L-arginine in this situation, as the beneficial forms of nitric oxide promote blood flow and the dilation of blood vessels. All right, so this helps in the process from L-arginine to nitric oxide, NO. Bodybuilders like this because increasing blood flow to their muscles enables them to lift heavier weights, work out longer, and recover faster, thus building more muscle. Good nitric oxide activity has also been shown to lower the risk of cardiovascular disease. Now, there are some YouTube videos of testimonials that people who have arthritis can increase by increasing their nitric oxide as well. Now, if we think about blood flow, increasing blood flow, that's what we do in therapy, is to get you on the bike or use the pulleys or to do ahead and, use some arm swings and get a little bit of a warm-up going on. And the whole process sometimes is just that. We don't have to do any kind of strengthening or stretching. At times, it's the circulatory aspects of the workout that's actually benefiting you with your pain relief, because of the blood flow. And healing can happen with improved blood flow, correct? All right. So, the good and the bad of nitric oxide. So let's look at the dark side. Now, here on this broadcast, we will look at the dark side, and the dark side sometimes is actually beneficial to look at because it gives us a better picture of how we can utilize certain biohacks to be able to improve your health and decrease pain and improve recovery. Unfortunately, arginine may also increase a very pro-inflammatory and damaging form of nitric oxide called the inducible nitric oxide. Researchers have found that when an autoimmune reaction creates a surge in Th17 activity, it stimulates an enzyme called inducible nitric oxide synthase to produce more inducible nitric oxide. When Th17 goes up, the inducible nitric oxide synthase goes up. And inducible nitric oxide sets about destroying body tissue such as the thyroid gland, erroneously targeted by the dysregulated immune system. All right, several references on that. And what's nice about Dr. K is that he has other articles that are linked within and embodied or embedded in the article. And you can look at that. And if we have time tonight, which we probably don't because we're at 36 minutes already, to look at the difference between Th1 and Th2 as it deals with autoimmunity. And that's going to be very important on how we look at treating this, because certain things can improve that and sometimes it can make it worse. So you can't just have a blanket for everybody. And I almost think this is a necessary article to go through if we can at least look at the diagram. In other words, TH17 gives the orders to attack, but inducible nitric oxide is the perpetrator that carries out the dirty work. Unfortunately, people who take arginine may be subjecting themselves to unnecessary increases in INOS activity and hence more inflammation. So that's why we have to be careful not to just give people arginine or glutathione or just different ways to enhance the nitric oxide, because it could be stimulating this inducible nitric oxide synthase enzymatic reaction that makes this work, this inflammation, activating the TH17 cells. Like TH17, inducible nitric oxide synthase isn't all that bad. Its pro-inflammatory role comes in handy to combat viruses, bacteria, and other pathogens. The reference is also below. But the health imbalances that lead to immune diseases are the same ones that overstimulate the production of INSO that destroys body tissue. We can test TH17 levels just as we can test TH1 and TH2. This is helpful because if a lab panel shows that TH17 cytokines, because they are cytokines, to be elevated, this tells us tissue is actively being destroyed and is vital to quench that process. So we're looking at biochemistry. Remember, we talked about biochemical neurophysiology. The good news and the bad news about nitric oxide. Bodybuilders who take arginine think nitric oxide is good. A practitioner seeking to tame the destruction of an autoimmune process may look upon nitric oxide as bad. Which is it? It depends on the form of nitric oxide the body is producing. So far, I have talked about inducible nitric oxide, which the TH1 or TH2 triggered autoimmune attack activates via TH17 to destroy the tissue. For people experiencing autoimmune flare-ups, this system is in overdrive. However, we can combat this destruction by activating two beneficial forms, technically called isomers, of nitric oxide: endothelial nitric oxide and neuronal nitric oxide. Let's talk a little bit about endothelial nitric oxide. Again, this article is excellent because it's so succinct. It very much is, and can make even those who have a difficult time understanding to understand. Endothelial nitric oxide is found in the lining of the blood vessels. It aids in tissue recovery and regeneration, enhancing blood flow, dissolves plaque, and dilates the blood vessels. Now, last time I gave that nitric oxide dump exercise series, and it, in fact, is activating this endothelial nitric oxide. One thing that dramatically activates endothelial nitric oxide is exercise, and also the high interval training or high intensity interval training. When you exercise, an increase in blood flow turns on the endothelial nitric oxide system, which helps dissolve plaque in the arteries. Unfortunately, autoimmune diseases often comprise this symptom. Now, we not only have autoimmunity, but we also have those things that are inflammatory. Metabolic disorder. I mean, from diabetes to atherosclerosis to even Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, all have a inflammatory role. And of course, it's tied with the the immunity as well. Unfortunately, autoimmune diseases often compromise this system, thus hindering the delivery of blood to the tissue. This not only makes body tissue, such as the thyroid gland, more vulnerable to inflammation and destruction, but also makes it more difficult for these tissues to recover and heal. So not only does it destroy tissues, but it can diminish recovery and healing. So that's why it's almost very important to look at that secondary article about TH1 and TH2. Now, he talks about the significant importance of this vitamin D, and we'll have to talk about that also later. A weak endothelial nitric oxide system helps explain cold hands and feet, the loss of hair, weak nails prone to fungal infections, other symptoms frequently found in conjunction with autoimmune diseases. So we see this sometimes even with chronic fatigue syndrome. Poor blood flow robs the brain of blood, and hence oxygen and nutrients, and brain function deteriorates. Poor blood flow to the digestive tract is one cause of leaky gut and poor gut function. Coupled with inflammation and poor glutathione activity, the person with a chronically activated immune disease can never seem to repair her gut. This is why, so this is his promotion of a APE diet. Now, what is the APE diet? Now, we can say the autoimmune protocol diet, but some of you know it as the autoimmune paleo diet. So it stems from this trying to decrease inflammation, as we are looking at that. And there is a link for that if you're interested in that. Now, according to Dr. Grieger, one of the most beneficial diets for multiple sclerosis, which is an autoimmune disease, is actually a vegan diet, right? So it's hard to do the autoimmune diet because of its restriction of nuts, seeds, legumes, and grains. Now think about that. How can a vegetarian be able to survive in an autoimmune diet? It is not non-paleo friendly, if you know what I mean. Now, paleo should not just incorporate animal protein, because if we looked at the caveman, more or less, it was rare for them to have meat, and they had more the other things that are in the autoimmune diet or the paleo diet. All right, so it's not just the big Ruth Chris on front of your table there. All right, so the repairing of the gut is important, and according to Dr. K, it is, and on also Dr. Gundry, if you're interested in his work. Overall, the research shows endothelial nitric oxide plays a big role in preventing and taming autoimmune disease due to its inhibition of overactivity in both Th1 and Th2 systems. Now let's look at the neuronal. Now, we're not going to have too much time left to do everything that we want to do tonight, so we might even have to have a part 3, or we might just come back to this topic because it's very interesting. Neuronal nitric oxide. Neuronal nitric oxide acts on the brain and nervous system, enhancing the ability of the brain and nervous system to adapt to change. Communicate between neurons and recovery. Because good brain health is vital to absolute every organ and system of the body, we want neuronal nitric oxide levels to be sufficient and active. Okay, so a very limited discussion on neuronal nitric oxide. How to boost good nitric oxide and dampen the bad. Now, this would be very interesting in the treatment. Now, I'm not a nutritionist, functional medicine doctor, or a naturopath, so I can't say what to do. You have to go to the site, or you have to go to your own practitioners to find out about that, right? I can't discuss about that, how it relates to physical therapy, so we're going to verge forward and look for those PT hacks if we can find them. So we know endothelial nitric oxide helps to tame the autoimmune response and aids in tissue recovery. We know we have bad nitric oxide, inducible nitric oxide, which is overactive during Th17 stimulated autoimmune attacks. We also know that taking arginine is not desirable because although it might boost endothelial and neuronal nitric oxide, it may also boost the destructive inducible nitric oxide. These are the facts I considered as a practitioner when I began exploring these mechanisms, how they further help my autoimmune patients. The clinical goal is to modulate Th1, Th2, Th3, and Th17 systems. By modulate, I mean influence them in behaving properly, increase endothelial nitric oxide and dampen the inducible nitric oxide response. Eventually, after my ongoing review of the research and clinical experience, it became apparent glutathione pathway integrity and nitric oxide modulation, boosting the good and dampening the harmful, offer profound responses. So you can think about how that and how it affects that. And these are some nutritional aspects, which includes the, let's see here. All right, so let's move forward. I think I have here, for the best results, take these compounds before exercise, even if it's a walk around the block. Exercise will get the blood flowing and enhance the effects of the endothelial and the neuronal nitric oxide activation, in addition to trying to subside the inducible nitric oxide synthase enzymatic reaction for Th17, which makes IL-17, which then is the cause of this tissue destruction. All right, and here are the references for that. Now, I'm going to go back to this here, and this will be our final article, and it's still with Dr. K. Please look at his information. It's very excellent. It's drknews.com. And this is my first introduction to Dr. K. He might have some, other things that might be considered questionable, but I have found none so far, and I appreciate his view on it. And I'm going to look at this next article by Dr. K. Now, I believe on the bottom of this is going to be the connection for the TH1 and TH2. It should have been in the article itself, but I didn't see it. And I should be able to find that here in a minute. If I don't, I'm going to have to just search on it. All right, so let's look at it involving, let's see here. We're looking specifically at cytokines. All right, let's just look at autoimmunity. Should be here. We'll have to do a quick find of this. Here it is. Are you Th1 or Th2 dominant? This is a very excellent article, and hopefully we have time to do this in the last 10 minutes here. Once the gene for autoimmune disease has been turned on, it can't be turned off. Interesting. The only thing can be done clinically is to turn down the volume on the immune response by restoring balance. So once it's on, it's on. One trick is to discover which side of your immune system is more active. The side that deploys natural killer cells, or natural killer and cytotoxic T cells, or on the other side deploys B cell antibodies. So there's two different types of responses. If you're producing too many natural killer and cytotoxic T cells, the ones responsible for killing invaders, if so, you are Th1 dominant. That stands for T helper cell dominant, and that would be the natural killer and cytotoxic T cells. Are you producing too many B cells, the ones in charge of tagging the intruder so it can be readily identified? If so, you are Th2 dominant. If you are dominant one or the other, B cells, or the natural killer or cytotoxic T cells, your immune system is out of balance, and your autoimmune disease is either highly or already underway. The helper T cells communicate and orchestrate the immune attack. They are the dispatchers that send messengers to fetch natural killer toxic T cells and B cells. By measuring these messengers or cytokines in blood tests, I can find out whether the patient with an autoimmune disease has either Th1 or Th2 dominance. Cytokines are like hormones. They are chemical messengers that make things happen. Interestingly, Th1 and Th2 cytokines affect thyroid function beyond driving Hashimoto's disease. Elevated Th1 or Th2 cytokines also block thyroid receptor sites, preventing thyroid hormone from getting into the cells and thus causing symptoms of low thyroid activity. We determine whether someone is Th1 or Th2 dominant by measuring cytokines, chemical messengers that stimulate the production of natural killer and cytotoxic T cells or B cells. So there's a lot of repetition here, but it's helpful for those people who are just being introduced to these concepts. All right, so in Th1 cytokines, these include IL-2, IL-12, tumor necrosing factor alpha, and interferon. In the cytokines Th2, it's IL-4, 13, and 10. Although there are exceptions to every rule, I have seen recurring patterns of Th1 versus Th2 dominance. For instance, about 90% of my patients with Hashimoto's are Th1 dominant. They're natural killers, and cytotoxic T cells are overactive, thus attacking thyroid tissue. Research not only confirms my experience, but studies also show that type 1 diabetes, multiple sclerosis, and chronic viral infections are often associated with T1 dominance. Now, this is going to be very crucial later when it talks about treatment. On the other hand, lupus, dermatitis, asthma, and multiple chemical sensitivities are associated with Th2 dominance. However, these are generalities and should not be taken as a rule. It is also important to note that not all immune diseases can be traced to Th1 or Th2 dominance. Other possible causes include immune defects and deficiencies. In other words, no cookbook recipe can be used for just the autoimmune disease cause or etiology. Thus, a basic understanding of immunology is the key. So how do you address this? Again, I'm not giving you the advice. This is just this website and its advice to those who are reading or what is being used in his clinic. When addressing autoimmune disease, the goal is to restore balance to the immune system. I approach this in several ways. Unstable blood sugar, gut infections, and poor adrenal health, all of which are practically universal in this country, worsen autoimmune conditions. Removing gluten from the diet is vital in his situation, and as it deals with the people who have Hashimoto's and gluten intolerance. Again, going way back towards that earlier article when it talks about the autoimmune diet or autoimmune protocol diet or autoimmune paleo diet. So gluten is then reduced in these individuals, and this is talking specifically at Th1 dominant. Support regulatory T cells. Beyond those basics, however, I use natural medicine to balance the immune system. My first step is to support the T cell regulatory cells. This is the one that I see on here is the emulsified vitamin D is a powerful immune modulator and supports the T regulatory cells when used in therapeutic doses. So Dr. McCullough mentioned this, and we had this even with the treatment of COVID when it comes to the president. We also had that increase in the vitamin D and the importance of vitamin D. Now, can we get enough vitamin D from sunlight? Our aging skin, the atmosphere, the pollution, the UVB, cancer type of producing type of radiation, maybe it might not be safe to get it from the sun. I mean, we even don't have enough time for it to be on our skin to be long enough. We get sweaty and we take a shower, and there it goes down the drain. So we have to consider dietary aspects, and that's just not eating certain foods, but even supplementation may be the key at this point, unless further research tells us otherwise, and that would be D3. So it talks about that. It talks about glutathione and the like. But we had that information earlier, and it's very informationally important to know that. NAC, which I talked about earlier, and that's a key compound in glutathione activity, and it is rapidly metabolized into intercellular glutathione. Again, that is also difficult just to take in and of itself. So there might be some other things that might be the necessary supplementation, but I'm not a specialist on that either. And that would be, trying to remember now, can't remember. Oh well. You'll have to look at that. I'll look at that next time and see if I can leave some references on that. ALA, which is also involved with EPA and DHA. ALA would be in food. And as we produce that and convert that into EPA and DHA, it might be more beneficial to get it as DHA and EPA, but that's not specifically speaking about that, because he just talks about ALA. Also talks about selenium and milk thistle and such like that, right? So, hopefully this is good information for you. So we need to be aware of how this is going to be important. Now I'm going to show you just one more article in the last minute, if I can find it. It just deals with COVID, but that's okay. We'll just do it next time. Again, thank you for joining the broadcast, and please join us in our discussion via the chat if you'd like to, those who are listening in, or will be commenting later on the taped or videotaped broadcast. It is also on YouTube and Facebook Live. The Biohacker PT, thank you very much and good night. So here we are again. We're at a close for another broadcast. The body is interesting for sure. All these chemical reactions. And we get lost in the details. We look at the tree instead of the forest. Now, could we look at the forest for a moment and step back and realize that we are not only hacking into better health and longevity, but we are trying to have an eternity of health. And how do we have an eternity of health? Not only to live 180, but to live forever. You can decide on your own for that answer. But that might give you hope. And regardless of the biochemistry and neurophysiology, if we plug into that hope, that might be the best and ultimate biohack yet. Again, we want to thank you for joining us here on the Biohacker PT. Our broadcasts are for you and for those who are in pain and suffering and have insomnia and have disease and dysfunction, dysregulation of your immunity, and out of controlled chronic inflammation. Let's be a tribe, a family, a brotherhood, a sisterhood, and join together and support each other towards eternity. Join me again next time.